Holograms are seen in a lot of movies and music videos, and there is no single way to make them. For example, this one was made with a real actor, plus a CG double, and then some compositing magic. And this one is just a cutout with a few compositing tweaks, and these ones are what we are going to make from Blade Runner, and they are made in a very clever way, or at least I believe I figured out a very clever way to make them. I also made a really cool hologram tool that you can use to get loads of different holograms from any picture. This is available on Patreon from the first tier on, and I think this will be really useful for sci-fi short films, for example. And let's start creating the hologram right now. So for that we need a picture that we want to hologramize, right? This can be, for example, something like that, right? We have to put this picture here on an object to make this look like a hologram, and this is going to be without a doubt the default cube. So let's drag a new shader window here, right? Because it's all shader based. Let's go to the rendered view and let's see how this cube looks. And it doesn't look good at all. That's because it's using UV coordinates to map this image around this object, but it actually needs this image to be just on the top face here, right? So for that we can use object coordinates, we put them here. So let's first make so that we only have one of those because they are repeating, right? We're not change the scale of this mapping node. We just have the infinite amount of those and we don't want this. So first, let's switch this to, instead of being repeat, to clip. And now we just have to shift this in the center. So it means 0.5 on the X and 0.5 on the Y. And then maybe something like that. And I feel it's maybe too stretched out, right? So I'm gonna switch it to something like that. All right, it's on the top here. Your image might have different values down here because it has different aspect ratio. But you know, you should have this on the surface here. Now let's delete the principled BSDF and let's add a principled volume shader. Let's plug this into the emission color and plug the volume into the volume. And let's go from EV to cycles real quick. And we don't see anything, and that's because we don't have any emission strength. I mean, we have color, but we don't have strength. So let's add 1 for the strength, right? This is our hologram. Time to go home. No, actually, we still have to make some tweaks here, right? So I'm gonna rotate this. What I want to do now is I want this to basically get smaller, right? I want those lines to converge in this point right here. Well, first I have to understand how can I even change the scale of my texture, right? Because that's necessary, right? So let's make this mapping node here smaller, and let's add a new one, a new mapping node with Shift A, and let's see what we can do here. The reason why I added the one before is that this one is like our very specific mapping node that is getting the one to the center, so I don't want to mess with those values here. I would much rather add a new one before that so that I can have like different stages of mapping, right? So how do I get this smaller? Well, I just have to increase the scale, right? So when the scale is 100, it is small, right? So this means the value should be, let's say 100 here, or the bigger, the better, right? Then at around 1, this is pretty big, and this should have the value of 1 here. All right, so how do we get this value of 1 to 100, right? First, we need a gradient in this direction, right? So this means something that is dark here and very bright here, right? So where do we get this? We get this from the object coordinates. So separate x, y, z, z. This was kind of a Russian accent. So we need a gradient. The x one here doesn't give us too good of things because, I mean, it's the wrong direction, right? It's this direction right now. The y one has the direction from up and down, right? And the z one has the correct direction because you see it is basically going from here to there. Or actually it's like 0 in the center here, and it's going to be 1 here. So it's kind of correct, but it's not right. So we need to get from 0, which is here, and from 1 to instead this kind of a thing. So if we connect this to the scale right now, and we preview how this shader looks, we get something like that, which is a hyperbolic function, right? This is not something very good. We need to get somehow these small values to be very big. So to do this, we just have to divide 1 with those values, right? If we divide them like that. Of course, 1 divided by 0 gives us nothing. But if this is like a very small value, for example, 1.001, this gets us 100, right? And this is very, very close here. So we need to get a math node here and use a division and use it like that. And well, look at that. The math was correct. It is working pretty nicely. So this division value here can be used to change the projection size of this thing. And let's think what we need as the next thing. Well, we need to remove one of those logos, precisely the one that is inverted, right? So I'm just going to take the cube, go to edit mode with tab and press G, Y, move it on the Y axis by exactly -1 meter, right? Pretty much like the hologram in Blade Runner. I mean, looks pretty nice. But the problem is it has the same brightness in all of the areas of this hologram, and I don't like that. So I would much rather have this be like weaker in this area and let's say stronger in this area. So for that, we need to change the emission strength, right? What do we have to change? This value here. And with what do we have to change this? With the separate XYZ, of course, because it has this time the correct gradient from 0 to 1. So let's shift right click drag a reroute here and again, and let's plug this into the emission strength. And let's see this. Okay, it has become a little bit weaker in this area here, but I want this effect to be more pronounced. So for that, there is no single better math node than the power node, which basically takes a value, for example, 1, and then puts it to the power of, in this case, for example, 1. So this area here doesn't change. Let's see if this is true. Well, this is not true, but the reason is that actually this value here is 2, right? So because the cube has the measures of, dimensions of 2 on the y-axis. So if you get 2 to the power of 18, the brightness is pretty bright here. So I would like to make so that this area here, this line of contrast, it basically happens right at the border of this thing here. So we have to add another math node before that, and we need to divide the range of 2 with 2 to get the range of 1. We're going to use something like that, right? But now we have lost the rays here, and it's pretty dim overall. So to fix that, we need another math node, which I have never used before, and this one is multiply add, right? So what it does is that we can multiply our thing to make it stronger, right? First, let's see how much do we have to add. Maybe something like that, I think. Maybe even some more exponent, like maybe even 10, something like that. And now we just have to bring back some of those things here. So we're going to just add a little bit here. So for example, 0.5. It works pretty nicely in my opinion. Maybe we should also add something in the end here so that it gets bright where it comes from. So let's do that, right? I saw this happen before with the power node. So I'm just going to add in the end something that you can add some more brightness with. So I'm going to add this one, right? I can add some values. So I'm going to take the power node and do something like that, right? And I'm just going to take an addition node and move this thing around here so that I finally get to the point where I actually like this thing. Where are you? You are here. All right. Now I'm going to preview this strength map here. Right. It looks like that. And I'm going to add this thing here. So now you see the starting is like a little bit brighter here. I would actually like this to be like a bit stronger, right? So I'm gonna add a multiplication node here to see how strong can I get this to be. Something like that. I think this looks pretty okay, right? All right, this is how the nodes look for us right now for a cube of 2 by 2 meters, of course, those values, and for my picture here. And now let's go on, and what I want to do now is that I want to add some stripes, you know, for the hologram that also were present in this Blade Runner's Joy hologram, right? What do I want to change first? I want to change the strength of the hologram in some areas, right? If I want to change the strength, I have to do again something after this multiplication, this addition here, right? So I need to multiply this with a number, for example, I mean, if I multiply this with 0 in some areas, I get some lines there. If I multiply with 1, I get the same thing I had before. So what should I use for that? I'm gonna use a wave texture. So taking the wave texture and preview this, right? Looks like that, nothing to create. So I'm gonna put this to the Y mapping instead. So we have some lines, right? And also, right, let's just multiply this right now. Let's see how this looks, right? Like that. Well, you see we have stripes. The problem with those stripes, though, is that they are straight and they are not converging into this point here. Now, if you like this, you can keep this. I don't like this too much. So let's think what is the reason of that. The reason is that the wave texture is using some vectors to calculate itself, right? It needs some kind of a mapping of the object, right? And if we are just using the generated ones, which gives us this result here, right? You see, we modified ours to converge our picture into one point, right? So let's use the same coordinates that after our first mapping node for the wave texture also, because we have changed those, right? We have scaled them with the division and XYZ and all that stuff. So let's take this mapping node and plug this into the wave texture. And now you see they converge into one point. The texture looks like that from the side. And this is pretty cool. So I'm gonna add a reroute with shift right click drag, move it down here, and all right. Do I like the sign pattern of this thing? Maybe I do like the saw pattern. I actually think the saw one looks the best here. Now I want to add some distortion here. I just need to change the coordinates that are used to map this picture, right? So if I use a mix RGB, for example, and I mix, or let's say I add red value to it, it should shift right. Right, because you see minus X and X is represented by a red channel, right? So if I add something to it, all right, it shifts right. I have to subtract for it to change the side, right? Do you understand? If I, for example, put like green here, it should move up and down. It's correct, right? It works. But I would like this to happen. This this shifting to the right side. I would like this to happen only where there is, you know, only in specific areas in the border of this thing here, right? Like that, something like that. For that, first I need to have some space. So I'm gonna scale up my cube, or actually I'm just gonna G and X, move those sides a little bit so that I have some room for the displacement. Now I'm gonna add a noise texture, right? Because I basically want the factor of this thing to like change a little bit from the top down. So the noise texture looks like that. I'm gonna use the same noise coordinates, right? Which makes it look like that. So before it was like normal, now it is more like converged. I'm gonna add a color ramp, and now I'm gonna drag this like that. And this looks pretty bad. I mean, I would like this to more be stretched as a drew out. So I'm gonna use a vector math before that, and I have to multiply this with something, right? So if I add something, it just switches, it just shifts the texture around. But if I multiply this, I can distort it, right? So I can, for example, multiply this with 15 and then increase the scale a little bit, do something like that. And now I can use those white values here as the factor where this texture is going to be distorted, right? So I'm gonna make some more room for myself here. Move this thing here, these things here, here, here. And I'm gonna add this color ramp as the factor. Now the textures look like that. And I'm gonna go to principled volume, and you see this is distorted pretty crazily, right? Not that I like this too much. So I'm gonna drag down on this one, and I actually don't want to make this as strong. I think maybe something like changing this factor down to like 0.5 looks pretty good. So this was before, this is after. Makes it look a bit more interesting, I think. Maybe still a bit weaker would be nice, right? Something like that. The last and the final thing, chromatic aberration. Basically, the point here is that we're going to take this picture that we have here, right? Looks pretty cool. And we're going to separate its channels, right? Separate RGB. We're going to separate those. So we have the red channel, the green channel and the blue channel of the picture. And now we're gonna add another picture, which looks exactly the same. We're gonna separate it as well, red, green, blue, red, green, blue. And we're gonna combine those together, right? Combine X, or RGB, and combine the red and the blue from one picture and the green from another. What is going to happen? Nothing. It looks the same. Well, this is logical. They are exactly the same pictures. But what we're going to do is that we're going to add a vector math node, and we're going to shift one of those pictures ever so slightly. So what this does, you see, right, is that it moves it around. And when I look at the combine RGB, the shift, right? So I'm going to put it like 0.01. Looks pretty cool, I think. You can also play around with different channels, for example, blue from one thing and green from another thing, and you can do some stuff here, right? Actually, I think I like mostly the green. No, I think I like this one the best, right? So the hologram is pretty much ready. It is just missing one thing, and this is making it more readable, right? Because in your case, this picture might be even versely understandable. But before we do that, let's hear a word from our sponsor, Skillshare. If you don't know what Skillshare is, it's a learning platform for creative people, which I think you are. You can learn about all sorts of stuff. For example, I am teaching there about geometry nodes, and I have a pretty well-received class there. This class will teach you the fundamentals behind geometry nodes, and once you're finished, there is a whole world of classes on Skillshare waiting for you about graphic design, character design, concept art. I use it to learn creative things I'd like to know more about, such as YouTube storytelling by Thomas Taher, and sometimes completely new things as well. I'm pretty sure this is the best learning platform for all sorts of creative people. And you can access all of this for free, because the first 1,000 people to use the link in the description will get a 1-month free trial of Skillshare. See you there. So what is that thing to make this more readable? Well, this is actually an emission shader, right? So we're going to take an emission shader and we're going to use this as the surface. Done. No, actually, we need this thing here, and we need to put this on the surface of this thing here. So let's connect this to the surface of the emission shader. And the problem now is that we don't have the inside or the hologram anymore, right? We need to disconnect this to view this. So we just have to use a mix shader, right? To mix between transparency and the emission shader, right? So let's add transparent shader. I mean, this slider here can be used to determine where do we want to have transparency and where do we want to have the emission. Now, I want to have emission here, which is pretty much well understandable from the alpha channel of the picture, right? So if I were to connect this alpha channel to the factor and preview this, I would actually get a pretty nice result of like a 3D representation of a window into the 3D dimension. But actually I need to invert those, right? Because I mean, the alpha channel looks like that. So in the white area, we're going to have the second input, right? So we're going to have transparency currently only in the hole here, right? So we need to make it so that the emission is only where there is the alpha channel, right? So now this looks like that, and we have it looking like that. Well, this is well a bit too extreme, right? So we need a math node, right? We take the math node, we put it here, and we multiply it. Because why do we do this? Well, the weaker the white color is, the less visible the thing here will be. So if I make this like I can do some stuff here, right? So I'm gonna put like 0.1, for example. Play with those values, right? So the hologram is ready, but actually if you want to move this hologram, I forgot to tell you, you have to go to the second mapping node, right? And you have to move the Y, for example, right? So you can change the projection point here in a different direction, and you can, if it, for example, cuts off from the top here, you just have to select the cube, right? And move this face up a little bit, and this reappears, right? So just make sure you have enough room, and check out those different hologram shaders. They're pretty fun to use, and see you next time.